I'm Rebecca Murphy, and this is Engineering Unblocked. Engineering Unblocked is brought to you by Swarmia, where we're helping the best software teams get better. Today I'm talking to Emily Nakashima. She's the Vice President of Engineering at Honeycomb. We're talking about the hard choices an engineering leader has to make about how to structure and sometimes restructure their engineering organization. We talk cross-team collaboration, emphasizing engineering as an equal partner to other functions, and mistakes that seemed like such a good idea at the time. Emily, it is so great to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing great. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. We talked a couple weeks ago, just off camera, and it was so fun. I wanted to get you on camera to talk about some of the same things. So thank you so much for being here. And maybe let's just start by who are you? Why am I so excited to talk to you?
Well, I can tell you who I am, and then you can decide how you feel. So my name's Emily, she, her. I'm Honeycomb's VP of Engineering. I'll say a little bit unique for a VP of Engineering. I come from a front-end engineering background, which is how we originally met.
Yes.
But I've been at Honeycomb for 10 years or maybe even more at this point. Gosh. So I've been at Honeycomb for about 7 years now, and have been VP of Engineering for about the last 4.
Okay. So yeah, what was your Honeycomb journey? How does one day end up being the VP of Engineering of Honeycomb?
It's a long and winding road. I certainly didn't join expecting to take on this role. I really wasn't even looking for a new job, but I met the team and I met what they were working on. I thought, that's a great team. That product should exist in the world. And so I just thought, I have to go try this. I had managed a couple teams before, but I certainly hadn't been in any sort of executive leadership role. And I sort of jumped over to Honeycomb with the expectation of I would be their first front-end engineer, which that was fun. And it's a team of sort of folks with back-end and operational experience, and there was just such reverence for front-end, which is so rare. And so that in and of itself is so exciting. But I sort of set the expectation with the founders that I really enjoyed being a manager. I'd be happy to go back to that when it made sense. And one of the founders, Charity Majors, she was like, I don't think we'll need that for a long time, but we can see. And then of course, 3 or 4 months in, she was like, wait, remember what I said? Scratch that. And so happily, she and I think are fairly sort of philosophically aligned, but we have very different approaches to things. So in the kind of early years of the company, it was just us kind of load balancing all of the engineering leadership. And
sure.
I do feel really lucky to be someplace where the founders are willing to see how much you can grow. I think so many startups have that reputation for being innovative, but they actually want to just hire someone who's done it 3 times before.
Right.
And so part of it was, I feel just really lucky to have been someplace where they were like, all right, let's see. I mean, you can manage this, you can manage that. Let's see how far you can go before we need to hire someone over you.
Here you are. Not the CEO yet. I guess that's the
don't want to be. That's one thing I've learned in this journey. That job is hard.
That job. You don't need that job. I should have started by getting you to say what Honeycomb even is, in case anyone doesn't know. I've used it in past jobs, and one of the things that really stands out about it is that it's a beautiful product. And so I'm it's clear that you've invested in front end and really being thoughtful about that. But yeah, maybe tell our audience what Honeycomb actually does.
Thank you. Yes, I should remember it. Sorry to our marketing team. I will remember to do that every time from now on. Yeah. So Honeycomb is an observability platform, and we are sort of the category creators of observability to an extent. So we sort of came into the world where people were really talking more about monitoring, and then there were different tools kind of in that space, from logging, distributed tracing, and we bring all those things together in one platform. And I'll say the way the product looks was something that actually drew me to the company, because especially if you remember back in the kind of 2010s, developer tools used to all have such a Star Wars vibe to them. I think the sort of prevailing design style was very sort of dark and very not to gender things, but masculine kind of. And Honeycomb was brightly colored and kind of rainbow. And I was like, yes, our developer tools should look friendly and be approachable and warm. And so I love that they went for that approach.
Yeah, you either had the dark scary or the Jenkins. That's I don't know if you've ever used Jenkins in its full glory. Not so beautiful, but did the job once upon a time. So what talk to me about this observability versus monitoring. I know this is a huge part of Honeycomb's kind of reason for existing, and it's a major philosophy that drives the product. So can you just talk a little bit about the difference between those two things, and what is observability as a category?
Yeah, of course. So the definition of observability actually comes from control theory, and the idea from control theory is that you can understand the state of a system without needing to change anything about it. So just being able to look at the outputs of the system. I think you can see how that could translate to the world of software, but I think sometimes it is a little more aspirational, and you're in a little bit more of a like instrument deploy workflow sometimes. But the sort of core of that we really want to embrace at Honeycomb is making sure that people feel like they can ask and answer any question about their systems. And the connection Charity always makes is like, if you have a dashboard full of graphs based on pre-aggregated metrics, you can answer all the questions you already knew you wanted to ask. But in the world of observability, you should be able to realize you don't know something and then go get the answer relatively quickly versus being stuck because you didn't think to, add your graph to the dashboard, 2 months ago.
Right. And just, I'm going to fangirl a little bit because we use this product we use Honeycomb at Stripe for monitoring all of our DevOps and DevProd kind of systems. So we didn't use it for production stuff, but we used it to great utility for understanding how our engineers were working and where they were hitting bottlenecks. And exactly like you said, this is the fangirl part. Like exactly like you said, you could come up with arbitrary questions and pretty much have to do nothing to the existing systems in order to answer those questions. And it was just, it was fun too. It was like fun to put together the queries and see what the answers were.
Nice.
So yeah, loved it. Don't need it so much in my current job. So sorry about that, but it was huge for us in my last role.
I love that use case so much though. Like I feel like so many companies forget that like fundamentally everything is software now. And like your tools are software. Like you can actually use your production tools in other places besides production, and it can be just as effective or more. So we have a lot of customers who do that same thing where they're using Honeycomb in their CI/CD pipeline or in their BI stuff, and it's like the impact is the same even if the problem space is different.
Yeah, and especially once you get to the point that you have 1,000 engineers or something like that, like that's a solid user base to have a lot of questions about, and they're trying to do their job, and it was a great tool for kind of understanding where they were getting stuck. So people would come to us and be like, this build took 2 hours. And we were like, that is like not possible.
Oh no,
that is not possible. And Honeycomb helped us see like, oh yeah, in your one particular super pathological case, you are doing a very bad thing every day. And that's why it's taking 2 hours. So anyway, yeah, love it as a tool. That's my little personal plug. I just think it's really great. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit just about your role as like this VP role, and kind of understand a little bit more about what you're responsible and accountable for, and just talk about some of the challenges that you've run into along the way. I know every job like this is extremely unique, and generally the stories that you get to tell afterwards are interesting to lots of people, even though the context is so unique to Honeycomb. So let's start by, what is your job? What does it mean to be a VPE at Honeycomb? And what's the size and scope of the role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that on paper, the answer is that I am the departmental leader for engineering. And that is like, to me, that describes like actually the least interesting part of the role. Like I love that part of the job. I love working with our engineering directors and our engineering teams, but it's the part of the role that I understood the best coming into it. And, one thing I didn't realize when I was taking that step up from director to VP, I was sort of lucky enough to be Honeycomb's first director of engineering and then first VP of engineering. And so it was kind of cool because I had a little bit of time to kind of like grow into the role and figure out what it was, but it also meant I hadn't seen anyone else do the role. And so at first I thought, great, like it's the same job, but I just have this different title. And I didn't realize that, in part of that jump, I would be joining our exec team. And that's a whole different world, right? Like,
whole new game.
Yep. And so, I think a lot of the most interesting parts of the job really are just being a partner to other executives at the company and sort of like making those strategic decisions, basically helping to run the company. There's always a balancing act where you want to make sure that doesn't distract you from running things really well day to day in engineering. But I think especially as a developer tools company, people are so interested in like, who are software engineers? How do they work? How do they make decisions? How do they buy stuff? And so it is really fun to be in the room with our executive team and help kind of work on strategy with, I think our founders have been quite smart in that they have some people like me who have sort of grown up with the company. And then we've, of course, supplemented that with many of our go-to-market leaders are quite seasoned and have come from, doing this before multiple times at other companies. And so it's really fun to just sort of be in the room and have all those perspectives together as we think through like, what are the big strategic decisions we're going to make?
Yeah, I remember when we talked previously, you mentioned that that something that's unique about Honeycomb is the amount of cross-functional engagement that happens. That it's not, engineering is its ivory tower, and everyone else has to come beg for things from engineering, which is how it works in some cases. Can you talk a little bit about that? About just kind of how, like, what is, you say I work with stakeholders in other departments, but like, what is that? What does that mean, and how does that are you a shit umbrella, or are you like really coordinating and driving people below you to do that same sort of collaboration?
Ooh, yeah. I wish I could take more credit for that than I think I can. I think like wonderfully, a lot of that actually comes from our founders. And I think there's two things they've really emphasized that make such a huge difference there. Number one is transparency. Like I think Charity in particular, she's the person who at past jobs, she was a key leader maybe within the company, but because she wasn't an exec, she felt like she maybe didn't get all the information that was actually useful to her job, and just didn't get to understand exactly what was happening within the company, to her detriment sometimes. And she really had this commitment from the start to be like quite radically transparent with employees at the company. Like at a certain point, she realized like, maybe I don't need to take everyone through all the twists and turns of like fundraising, for example, because that's really distracting. And like, not everyone needs to experience the emotional ups and downs of that. But really, like, I think from the top down, we are very transparent with people about the business. And so I think that naturally sort of cultivates this curiosity of, you just hear all the time about what's happening in our different go-to-market teams and, what's happening in even like the people team in finance. And so that sort of like cross-functional curiosity, I think, is really sort of cultivated through that. I think also, Charity and Christine, our founders, both have such respect for the disciplines that they don't come from. So both of them come from software engineering backgrounds. Christine is more of a software engineer. Charity has been like a DBA and the sysadmin and like all those operational roles, like pre and post DevOps. And I think they understand that like, that maybe the less they understand a part of the business, the more they should bring like a healthy respect to that. And so I feel like that's always sort of flowed through our culture. So I know that I can sort of bring my expertise as a software engineer and as someone who buys these sorts of tools sometimes, but there's such a healthy respect for like, we both have to bring our knowledge to the table to be successful.
Right. How does that affect hiring? How does that affect the kind of people that you hire?
Yeah, we have I think we hire maybe a different shape of software engineer than many companies might look for. And I think sometimes people are confused as to like, I was such an incredible principal and this engineer at this company. I keep applying to Honeycomb. They won't hire me. And it is really, we're looking for that cross-functional respect. We're looking for really strong communication skills because we know that, to make all that work, you need to be able to really build strong partnerships with all your adjacent functions. We do triad-based development within our teams. So there's a designer, a product manager, and engineers all kind of like at the table together in their teams. And so we're looking for someone who can collaborate with those roles. And then because we practice service ownership as well, we are also looking for someone who has like some degree of operational experience, or for less senior roles, someone who's okay with being on call. Maybe if they haven't done it before, they're willing to learn. So we're certainly not looking for like the just sort of like widget engineer who's going to like churn out code. And it makes it a little harder, but luckily we have a strong enough engineering brand that we're still able to do it. We'll see how long that lasts for.
Ballpark, I don't know how specific you want to be on live TV, but how many people are in the engineering organization and at Honeycomb in general?
Yeah, I think luckily with our approach to transparency, I just can say all the stuff live, which is great. I think within engineering, we're probably about 75 today, and the company is maybe 225 total.
Got it. So it's a pretty healthy, like, engineering is a significant portion of the company, and that's cool. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what you are. You talked about being responsible for you run the engineering team, but down in the weeds a little bit, like, what are the things that you are having to pay attention to this week, this month, this summer, this quarter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there's a real difference between what my stakeholders think I am responsible for and what I'm paying attention to. And if you ask a lot of them, it's like velocity, velocity, velocity. And the reality is that like within engineering, it's constantly, how it is. It's always a balancing act between all the different things that you could spend time on. So obviously making sure that we are, moving with high velocity and shipping value to customers is something that we think about quite a lot. That's, why we have Swarmia, part of it. We sort of want to understand how people are working together and make sure it's efficient. And there's also just so much time I spend thinking about all the other pieces: reliability, security, performance, quality, accessibility. And I think like the hard thing about those is sometimes the better you do at them, the sort of less grace you get from the organization to invest in them, right? People are like, oh, you never talk like that seems fine. Yeah, exactly. And people can forget that behind the scenes, it turns out that it's fine because you spent like, 18 months on an incredible effort to like make that good.
Right. So how is that group of 75 people structured today? How did you, and how has that evolved over time too? Because, once upon a time there weren't 75. So yeah, how does it work today, and how did it kind of grow up to be that way?
Yeah. So today we are sort of broken into three major, what I would call domains, or product domains in some cases, maybe engineering domains in others. We've got platform engineering. That includes our SRE function, our core services team, which is sort of operating these sort of like high throughput backend services that are sort of challenging to operate. And then it also includes a team called App Enablement that's brand new, that I'm so excited about, that's sort of thinking about developer productivity and experience. And it also includes our storage team, which is sort of the core differentiated technology of Honeycomb. So within platform, those are sort of generally like backend or kind of more infrastructure leading teams. Those teams don't actually have an embedded product manager and designer, although they do have to work closely with our product function. And I think that one is sort of the natural slice that is replicated at other startups of the same size everywhere. The two pieces that are maybe a little bit different for us, we are broken into, the other domain is that we have is product engineering, and that is people doing web development, except that because we believe in service ownership and putting software engineers on call, those are actually quite deep teams with ownership of some fairly intricate and interesting backend services as well. And so like staffing that can be quite interesting. A team of 5 people, you've got to have like a couple people who are good front end experts, and then a couple people who are backend experts, and at least a couple of people who've been on call before. So a lot going on in product engineering, even though I still think it's a great approach, especially for trying to understand, what we're asking our customers to do and kind of build that empathy. And then the final domain that we have is what we call DevX engineering. And that's really thinking about external developer experience for all of Honeycomb's customers. So it's all of our open telemetry investments. It's some of the software that we create that customers run on-prem. So we have a sampling proxy called Refinery. And then we also contribute quite heavily to the open telemetry collector. So it's folks who are working on that as well. And I think mostly we landed on those 3 domains to kind of mirror the structure we had in the product organization. So we really want to kind of structure ourselves along the lines of what provides value to the customer. We will probably continue to evolve it, but it's working okay for now. Before this, we kind of did a dynamic reteaming model, and there's good and bad in that. It worked up to a certain point, and you could probably guess exactly why it fell apart. I think up until maybe about half the size we are now, so maybe 35 engineers, we would dynamically reteam like every quarter or 2 quarters. And it was great for churning out product surface area as fast as possible. And of course, the downside is like, who maintains that product surface area? You sort of, you're like calling upon people to sort of be good citizens and go like quietly fix it in the background. But it did not optimize for, investing in your code and your tools over the long term. So it's the right time to make the switch.
The one person who worked on that one thing 6 months ago to figure out how to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of digging in Git history, trying to understand like who has been here before me.
Right. So how does collaboration work among those teams? That's one of the big challenges that companies face as they scale up, is that you used to have this tight-knit group of people who all knew each other and could self-organize to do good work. And then at some point you get to a number where that just doesn't work as well. So how do you see collaboration, especially cross-team collaboration? Like, do you Do you encourage it? Do you actually try to prevent it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, candidly, that is definitely something we are sort of working on updating right now, and it is like kind of for the reason you described. We realized we needed to put a little more structure around it because it was really driven by sort of cross-functional relationships that people had built across teams that just happened to be really strong. But if you happen to have like teams collaborating on lines where there wasn't one of those pre-existing relationships, all of a sudden things became maybe a little more challenging. And so what we are trying now is to sort of have 3 explicit different models for how you can do that cross-team collaboration and give the teams the opportunity to align on which one they're going to pick based on the project. So part of the way we've structured our product domains is like the product manager often has a relatively ambitious remit that sort of follows a customer journey, but that means that it's very common for that team to have to potentially go touch some piece of code in someone else's portfolio to like address that customer need, right? Rather than just we maintain these 5 services. We're trying to solve ambitious problems for the business, which is great. But it means like almost every major project, you might work with 2 or 3 teams to ship, what you're going to ship by the end. So the 3 models people can choose from are, there's sort of the obvious one of, we are just going to do this little bit of work in your portfolio, but we're going to talk to you about it first, and we're going to make sure that you code review it and sign off. I think that one is often kind of the norm that everyone defaults to. And there is also the ability for the kind of that second team to say, hey, either this is a really challenging part of our code base to work in, or we think that we want to like refactor it and make some change, and we want to rather than have you go work on it, we really want to own making this change because there's some larger initiative that it needs to roll up into. And so that team can say, they can kind of negotiate and say, no, we're going to own this, and then this is the timeline it's going to happen on. There's a little back and forth to make that work. And then there's also a model where the team can say, hey, we really want to work on this, and we think we should adopt this piece of your portfolio. Like, you should just give this to us. And that one, of course, is like the least common, but I think that opening the door to let the teams have any of those 3 conversations has actually been really helpful. And I think sometimes just talking through those options, even if you're going to land on that first one, that's the most common one, can really help people kind of like unpack the issues that they're concerned about.
You answered the question I was going to ask. Now I'll ask the harder question, which is, what about model 4, where team A needs something from team B and team B says, not now? Or like becomes a perceived blocker to getting something done.
Yeah, that's a hard problem. So it's less of a hard problem for me because I have directors. So it's a hard problem for my directors, right? I think like that is the point where it becomes a negotiation between like typically the engineering manager, the product manager on each of those 2 teams. And then sometimes those people both roll up to the same directors, or sometimes it's like there's multiple engineering directors in the mix. We spent a lot of time doing like really in-depth relationship building at that layer because those are the people who resolve all of those conflicts.
Do you have a process for? I'm just remembering at Stripe we had the unblocking process. Do you have a process when things can't be figured out at a lower level? I always put these words in air quotes because we're all on the same team, but there is an org structure. So, but yeah, do you have any sort of what's the process when people can't agree?
We don't have anything super set in stone or kind of baked. I think realistically, we are trying to get as close to consensus as we can, because even if you have a process for like getting a green light, the effectiveness of the answer really depends on how bought in both of the teams are. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having to create an official process in the next 6 months or a year. But right now it's like, just try to bring everyone.
Just talk to each other. Yes, yeah. Love it. So we've talked a bit in generalities about how all of this is structured and how it works. But maybe you can tell me a story about a specific cross-team collaboration and how it went, and what was challenging about it, and what went well.
Ooh, we have a fairly ambitious project right now that is around logging. So we have always allowed people to send logs to Honeycomb. But if you look at the really early messaging from the company, it was very kind of negative about logs. And it was like, why would you debug with logs when you can have events and traces or whatever? And it turns out that like we even looked at what we were doing and we were like, wait, everyone has logs. They stick around forever. Sometimes you do want to go look at them. And so we had to sort of, moderate that message a little bit. But as we have sort of looked at the needs that our customers have, especially folks who are bigger than us, who can't maybe transition tools as quickly. We went, oh, right, we need to just get closer to matching the logging workflows that they're already used to. And so we're starting to build some of that stuff into the product. And we had an interesting situation where we put a particular team in charge of that initiative that had, a great PM, a great engineering manager, a great designer. And we were like, and a great engineering lead, great tech lead. And we were like, this is the team. Like, these are the best people. They're going to go solve this problem. I mean, all our people are great, but like, we thought we had put together a really strong team. And we were like, they're going to go solve the problem. And then as they were getting into it, they realized that none of the work that they needed to do was in their team's portfolio. It was really, they just came up with this giant laundry list of work for other teams. And that's great. Like, they did a real discovery process and like really understood what the challenges were for customers. So they did exactly what we asked them to do. And then they had this awkward situation where they like rolled up with this giant list of like, here's all these things these other teams need to do. And we're actually still figuring out what to do exactly with that situation. I think what we will end up doing is sort of creating a little more official separation between like, this is sort of the remit of the triad and the product manager on the team, from these are like the portfolio pieces that the team owns, and be clear that it's okay that those things can actually diverge quite a lot. Like, the product manager can really be spending their time, like 90% of their time, on different features and problems than the team, as long as everyone is like getting what they need from those relationships.
That sounds like interesting ownership challenges where you have people, like one person wants to change something and somebody else owns it, and probably isn't practical for them to own all of it. How do you think about ownership and kind of structuring teams around? Do you structure them around problems? Do you structure them around like systems that they own? How do you think about that? And what do you optimize for there? Because you could optimize for like, let's reduce cross-team collab as much as possible, and let's try and get everything under one team's roof so they can do everything they need, or not that. So how do you think about that kind of ownership boundary question?
It's a great question, because it gets me to admit that we totally did it wrong, and now we're switching to something else. So for a while, we really we sort of had this idea that our product surface area was too small to really have clear product domains. So if you think about Honeycomb, the product, like, there's sort of this like query and storage engine at the center of it. And then there's all these views built on top of that all just like call down to the same underlying piece of technology. Like, that is the secret sauce. It drives all the graphs, all the visualizations. And the entire value proposition is like, there's one source of data, rather than having to like jump between 5 tools that have 5 different sources of data, which is great, except that when you try to divide up product domains for people, everyone's like, we're all kind of like sort of doing the same thing. We can just visualize it in like lots and lots of different ways. And so we sort of had the idea that we couldn't really have true product domains, because everyone was working on such an overlapping set of customer problems. And so what we did instead was we had these teams that owned portfolios of features. And I think the mistake that we made was saying that the product manager and designer on that team also just owned this portfolio of features. And it turns out that when you were trying to, solve the most exciting business problems that you can, taking your 5 features and like polishing them as much as possible is not actually the best way to have like incredible impact to the business. So that's how you've just sort of reverse engineered that whole situation that I just described, where we're in the process of moving to this model where we really want teams to own like a business or customer problem rather than own a portfolio of features. And that process has been partly driven by the teams themselves. We're sort of like, look at what you have today, and then you help us figure out what is the right sort of like team or customer mission based on the skills you have, based on the technologies you own, based on where your expertise is. And that process is like 90% done, but I feel optimistic that it will give our teams a more exciting remit and help them, especially like, I think such a hard thing can be at a startup, distinguishing what's truly important from all the other things that seem like good ideas to do. And once you can tie it to that kind of bigger business goal, I think it makes it much easier it's never easy, but it makes it slightly easier to set the priority of the, 200 things on your to-do list that you'd like to do.
You just you said magic word, which is goal. So talk to me about goals. How do goals? What's a good goal in engineering at Honeycomb, and how does Honeycomb set goals?
Ooh, we do both. We have an OKR process, and we do both OKRs and KPIs, which is I like that we make a clear distinction between those. We have KPIs that are just sort of health metrics that we track across all the different areas of the business. So everyone should sort of have some underlying data that they're looking at all the time. We also do those for process things like, PR, cycle time, out the door metrics, that kind of stuff. I won't, spend too much time promoting any particular tool. But we also do a quarterly OKR process where we pick the sort of specific highest priority goals for each team, department, and then we also do them at the company level as well, so that hopefully they cascade nicely down.
What do those goals look like? Are they, because goals can be a to-do list, goals can be outcomes, goals can be anything in between those two things. So what do those goals actually look like especially at the org level?
Yeah, so there's the theory and the practice. and the theory is that they are quantitative, that they're measurable. Ideally, there's some percentage. So move this business metric from this percent to this percent, have 35% of customers, get data in within the first hour rather than, 31%. And the reality is that very often, I think a hard thing for us is that the quarter timescale is great for almost everyone else in the rest of the business. And in engineering and product and design, it takes you a quarter to build and ship the thing. And then you need a quarter to measure and see if it actually had the impact that you want. And so that's actually something we're still trying to figure out the right process for. Like, I just sort of like quietly look behind the scenes at how those metrics are still doing a quarter later. But I would really love to bake it into our process such that, I think at this point, the teams are pretty good about probably half of the KRs tend to be like, yeah, we just have to ship the thing or like hit this milestone. And then half of them are generally relatively quantitative, like move this business metric by this percent. So we've at least got a mix. But I would love to have a clearer and more official process for the ones that are like ship the thing. There should be some long tail where you keep looking at the metric. And that's an unofficial thing right now and not an official thing. We do have a sticker that commemorates this that says my OKRs say ship the roadmap, which I laugh at every time I see.
You showed me last time. Love it. How much do the teams, like, how does goal setting actually happen? Is do the teams kind of receive company-wide wisdom and then turn that into their goals? Or like, how much agency do the teams themselves have in kind of figuring out what they'll work on in a quarter?
Yeah, so the joy and sorrow of engineering is that it's both top-down and bottom-up, which is either theoretically great or actually horrible, depending on who you ask. We have a company-wide process. Ideally, if we have our lives together, that process is like a couple weeks before we're asking the teams to write their own OKRs. Realistically, it's probably kind of concurrent or like a few days before. But there are always company ones. Happily, the company ones, the objectives we try to carry over for we try to make them year long. So hopefully it's not too shocking or surprising to see what comes out at the company level. But there's the company level ones. Those are released a few days before the teams are going to do theirs. And then generally the teams have a fairly good sense too, just from what's on their roadmap and what they've already been working on. And since we set them at the department level, very often at the department level, we're doing that, like looking up and looking down and trying to like merge them together. And realistically, probably one out of every 5 KRs, there is like that you catch the ships on the collision course where you're like, oh, you want this and you want that. And these cannot live together in the same slate of OKRs. And so that's what this week and last week has been all about. And it has been a lot of running around and me going, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that I was asking you to do those 2 completely incompatible things at once. This is my fault. And just having a lot of conversations with the teams. I think that if we were more disciplined about actually having the exec team like get it together like 3 weeks before the team is writing theirs, it would be a much smoother and easier kind of merging. And it's a work in progress.
When you figure that out, please tell the world, because I don't think I've seen anyone actually do that well.
Again, the directors are like the load bearing part of this. Like they are the ones like fitting the gears together.
So you've grown quite a bit and you're successful. That involves hiring in the engineering organization. How does Honeycomb approach hiring software engineers? I'm guessing that you don't have very much trouble attracting talent because it's a pretty cool company and a pretty visible company. But what then? What happens after I apply?
Yeah. I'll say we are very lucky in this regard, and that especially because we've got some kind of big name folks who have a good social media presence and who do a lot of conferences, Charity Majors, Liz Fong Jones. We have a great engineering brand, which I can take almost no credit for myself. But it does mean that we get, a lot of interest from great candidates all the time, which is really, really, it's an incredible gift. I've been at so many companies where you had to spend so much time even getting software engineers to reply back to your email, then it's not a problem we have. So I feel very lucky and hope we can keep that for as long as we can. And I think, the big things that are probably different for us, and one thing I mentioned earlier, but is I could say it a million times, is we do really stress communication and making sure that someone is really good at communicating with adjacent disciplines, not just with other engineers. And maybe like one way to kind of talk about that a little more specifically is we do have a technical take-home exercise. I know many people love to hate those, but I think it does actually tell you quite a lot about how someone will take on a task where time is a component. Time is not everything, but at the end of the day, if you work at a startup, there is time has a value. So we try to be we set fairly loose parameters around it, but we do at least look at how long it took someone to complete that exercise. And then one thing that we do that I really like, that's maybe a little different, is we always make sure we do a synchronous debrief with two people on our team after that technical take home, where the person sits down and they talk us through, this is how I approached the problem. This is the thing that was weird. And we ask them to give us feedback, and the technical take home is not that good. So most people will have like a lot of feedback, and it's like, can you give feedback to someone you don't know in a nice way, but that is like genuinely constructive, that points out the things that could be better. And that's been actually quite informative.
Hey, that seems actually really valuable. So, what are your expectations of engineers as far as working with people across the business, or do they need to do that often? I mean, of course, there's engineering and product and UX. There's that triad like you talked about, but I'm talking like more beyond that. Is there cross-functional interaction happening outside of engineering?
Yeah, I think we have an above average amount of that. And I think partly it is, it does kind of come from the top of, we've really tried to cultivate that respect for the other disciplines. But I think also we want to trust engineers, and we want them to understand the context of the business. And I think not every company wants to extend that to engineers. Like there's a little bit of like, we don't understand them. They do all that weird technical stuff over in the corner. Like certainly they cannot like understand our world. And I think like if you're building a startup, engineers are often, very smart, talented people, but they're also really expensive. Like you should go get some value out of them. Make sure they're aligned with the rest of the business. And so, our engineers often work very closely with. We've built a beautiful collaboration with our finance team. Actually, like a lot of people in engineering and finance, like actually talk every day, and they're always talking back and forth about like building models and like thinking about different optimizations we could make. And that's been, I think again, I take very little credit for that relationship, other than suggesting that it was maybe important. And then, Jess Mink, our director of platform engineering, and Lex Neva and a couple of other people on the team just sort of went and made it happen. And we also, work quite closely with product marketing, with customer success, with our sales folks and our solutions architects. And I think, again, it's a little bit of, we help them see what's important in the business. And so it feels natural to go, oh, I can't actually be successful at this without kind of reaching across the aisle and making sure I'm like bringing that person along with me, or like genuinely making sure that I'm taking into account their feedback as we're building. And I don't think we're perfect at it, but I think that at least we have gotten to the baseline of every engineer recognizes that it's important, and I'll take it.
And that's so interesting to see how that changes as you grow, because it's really easy for the first 10 engineers to be very interested in all these things because it directly affects their livelihood in a way that maybe engineering 100 doesn't feel that same connection. So it's interesting to think about how you create that in your hiring. I'm sure like a lot of what you're talking about is culture, and so we can use the word culture fit here. But I know that's also a bit of a weasel word, and can be used to mean I hired a bunch of people who have the exact same background as me. So what are you doing to make sure that you're also getting diversity of thought and diversity of contribution? The benefits that you get by hiring a diverse team. What do you do to kind of drive that and get all of these like positive cross-functional collaboration outcomes?
Yeah, I could talk about this for like 4 hours, and so I'll try to do the short version. I think actually one of the biggest unexpected accelerants for this was actually going from being based in the San Francisco Bay Area to hiring around the US and Canada. We started doing that a little bit before the pandemic, but we really accelerated it during the pandemic, as many companies did. And we really committed to like, we're going to be distributed forever, distributed first. We have a San Francisco office, but there's like 6 people who go in regularly out of, 225. And I think like it just, having worked at a lot of San Francisco based companies, there can just be an assumption. People walk in the room and they go, everyone believes this. Everyone feels this way. Everyone feels this way about this thing. Everyone is striving for this. And you just realize you can't do that when you work with people who live in a completely different part of the country than you, live a really different lifestyle, like have like a giant house on like 10 acres and like spend some of their time on their hobby farm after work, and I really think like I saw that be such an incredible sort of empathy and curiosity builder in a way that I didn't expect. So that was like the answer that for all the things that I try to design to support this, like that was the one that in some ways was like the most impactful that I didn't expect. We are quite a values driven company. And I think that helps kind of cleave apart the like gross part of culture fit from the part that is like genuinely useful and good. There's the bad part that's like, this person's like me. I would enjoy, getting a beer with them after work. And that's kind of like, that's not great. You don't want to hire for that because you just become more and more similar. And then the culture becomes very unappealing to anyone who could bring like a new idea to it. But then there are these sort of coherent values that drive the way we work together. And someone who maybe doesn't embrace those is going to have a hard time being successful with us. And you do want to interview for that. And I think partly because of Charity Majors and how much she is sort of values driven herself, the company really has consistently tried to spend time kind of polishing our values together and making sure they really are relevant. And the test we always use for that is like, do people repeat them in daily work around the company? And as long as that's true, we think that they're probably still relevant. But we try to ask questions on each of the values in the interview process. Like we sprinkle them into the different interviews. So it's not a weird all at once values thing, but that actually has been pretty successful. I think we have found ways to kind of like drill out the things that are specific to our culture, that are about like things we need to have a shared mindset around, rather than just like, does this person seem like a cool person that I want to talk to for a long time? Yeah.
Does anyone show up wanting to interview at Honeycomb without knowing of Charity? Is that like a possible thing?
In the first couple of years, I guess I've been hiring at Honeycomb since about maybe 2017 or 2018 now. And it took a couple of years. But now actually, especially because we hire in Canada and we don't geo-adjust salaries, we get so many people who like find us through LinkedIn and they're like, this sounds really cool. And like, that's quite a competitive salary. And actually, like, I actually think that's great. It's so good to have a mix of folks who are, or, there are people who maybe come more from like front end engineering and just are not following along with the observability conversation has been very sort of like DevOps centric. I love it whenever anyone's like, who's Charity?
Who's she? And if you don't know who Charity is, dear listener, look it up. Charity Majors. She has a lot to say about a lot of things, and she's pretty smart about all of them. So take a peek. Last question that I did not brief you on, so this is a surprise, but any hot takes about tech these days? These days are very different from 5 years ago days. Yeah.
Oh, since I didn't have this question ahead of time, I'm going to give you a real honest answer, and you can decide if you want to keep it in the final edit or not. I feel like there were so many things that we worked on improving in like the 2010s that really had such a positive impact on company culture and how we ran teams together. And we could do that because talent was so scarce. Like, really there was such a premium on, and like, I wish I had been more cognizant of this in the moment, understanding how much power we had as employees. But, I remember, when I was first getting started in tech, I really had a lot of questions about whether I could like be successful at all as a woman, as an openly queer person, as, all these things. And now all of that stuff seems sort of like a given, not at every company, but many places it's like, of course, right? And at Honeycomb, I hope that many people have that, oh, of course feeling. But I also feel such a need to like really quickly write down what worked and be like, what did we actually do back then? Because I have this feeling that we're going to have to go do a bunch of it all over again. I think about Women Who Code, which just, it went from being a local meetup to like a national organization. And then recently the national organization just talked about, because of the challenging climate, they're going to shut down. And I'm like, we have to capture what we did so that we can know, so that we can do it all again. So I feel a little bit of like Groundhog Day, but I also feel like there are we learned real things that we can deploy again.
Yeah, I love this. There's somebody who I've talked to recently who said, like, maybe psychological safety was a zero interest rate phenomenon.
Oh, no. Oh, that's so real.
It is so real. But yeah, I think it's been for us people who have been, I don't know, I've only been doing this since like 2006. And there are certainly people doing it longer than that. But yeah, what a journey these last few years especially have been to. And yeah, I didn't realize how much we didn't realize how, like, I knew it was good, but I didn't realize how quickly it could turn.
Yeah, I really wish I'd swung for the fences a little harder.
Harder back then. So, well, Emily, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And I hope people know more about Honeycomb now. And yeah, just really love talking about the kind of real nuts and bolts of doing the VPE thing. So this has been really great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I could talk about this stuff all day, so it's been great fun.
Great talk. And that's the show. Engineering Unblocked is brought to you by Swarmia, where we're helping the best software teams get better. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.